It's always a great pleasure to be in this institute. It's an ever-changing institute. Every time I come here, there are so many new things, and most of them are admirably new. So, admirably so. So it's always a great pleasure to come here. Last night, for instance, we were shown a Nil guy sitting by the roadside, and that's something which you can't even dream of seeing in the city of Bombay. So you can see why people like me are thrilled to be in this campus, this amazing campus. Coming to the talk, it's a talk which is on the borderlines of medicine, neurology on the one hand, and philosophy, religion on the other hand. I got interested in this topic because Professor Pia, who was a very senior German neurosurgeon, had organized a symposium in Bonn on the various philosophies of pain. So he had got together individuals from the Jewish faith, the Islamic faith, the Christian faith, the Buddhist following, and the Hindu following, amongst others. There were others. And it was a real treat sitting and listening to the various views and practices in these various religious faiths. And I knew nothing about the Hindu philosophy of pain. I'm a total ignoramus about Hindu philosophy and about all the great works. But when I had to prepare for this talk, and he gave us 1 year to prepare, so that was a golden opportunity to learn. And so I'm going to present a few of the fruits of what I've learned over there. The slide which is in front of you shows it was made somewhere around 1800 and in Calcutta, and it shows this practice where hooks are put into the paraspinal muscles, and then the individual is hoisted up and the entire column rotates, and so this person swings with those hooks in the paraspinal muscles. The entire weight of the body is on the hooks and the muscles and the tissues that the hooks are going in. And yet, neither when the hooks are placed nor when this person is brought down is there any trace of pain on the face of the individual, which is surprising, and which certainly was very surprising to the Europeans when they saw this being done in parts of India. To understand the basis for the Hindu philosophy of pain, we have to go to the very root. And the root of Hindu philosophy is the complex of 4 works which are grouped under the heading of the Vedas. And so we have these 4, the Rig, the Sam, the Yajur and the Atharva, and it's the Atharva Ved which actually concerns us, because the Atharva Ved deals with what we call medicine today. Health practices, illnesses, management of illnesses and so on. Now remember, we don't know when these Vedas were composed or written. There are postulates that these are several thousand years old, and the Western scholars, of course, say that no, they're not several thousand years old. They're about 800 or 1,000 years before Christ. Whatever be the truth, the actual fact is nobody knows when the Vedas were written. And unfortunately for us, we have not preserved what was handed down over the ages in our own country. So if you want palm leaf manuscripts or other old ancient manuscripts of these Vedas, you won't find them here. There is a reason for that. Ours is a hot and humid country, lots and lots of termites, we have heavy rain, fungus, and so on and so forth. So that may be one reason. The other reason, of course, is we have never really showed a cumulative interest in history and the preservation of ancient objects. So that may be another reason. When I was searching for an original kind of manuscript, not that I could read that manuscript, but at least I could use it as a slide when presenting the paper, I had to go to Tübingen. And in the University Library of Tübingen is a copy of the Atharva Ved, which was obtained from Kashmir. And so it's called the Paipalada version of the Atharva Ved. And in Tübingen, it is of course kept under very strict conditions of humidity and temperature, and the manuscript is very, very beautifully preserved. Now this is supposed to be, we are told that this is the origin of the Vedas, and how the Vedas were swallowed by Hayagriva, and Krishna rescued them and then handed them over to the scholars. And this is the page from the Atharva Ved, which the chief librarian of the University of Tübingen had kindly provided me. But the slide that you actually see is not from the Tübingen slide, because that slide has perished in fungus. And this is from the book which is listed right at the bottom, which has been published in America. Now, in the Atharva Ved, they have tried to analyze the causes of pain. Remember, we are talking of analyses and statements which were made long ago. So it would be dangerous for us to try and analyze these strictly according to our modern criteria. We have to remember that these are views and thoughts and philosophies which were voiced long ago. And they had analyzed, whoever it is that was responsible for the Vedas, that pain is essentially, there are three origins for pain. And one, of course, is natural and organic causes, which is what we deal with as physicians. The other is physical and mental suffering caused by men, birds, thorns, beasts, etc., which for us would translate into pain which results from accidents, skirmishes, wars, battles, fights, stab wounds, etc., etc. The last one is the one which is a little puzzling as far as we are concerned, and that is that physical and mental suffering can be caused by malalignment of the planets, by ghosts and by demons. Now this is something which for us is a little tricky, a little difficult for us to understand. There is an interesting sentence not elaborated upon, it's just put there, and that's how it is, that there is pain which can be father committed. That means your father has done something as a consequence of which you are going to bear pain or suffer pain. And then you start wondering whether they were referring to some familial or some genetic abnormality as the cause of pain in this particular case. Now, in those days, there was the most important individual in the community was the priest. And the priest also doubled as a physician. So it was a priest-physician who looked after the community, both the spiritual aspects of the health of the community and also the physical and mental aspects of the community. And these priest-physicians, they invoked gods and they offered sacrifices. You might think that this was something from bygone days, but as almost all of us know, if we go into the hinterland of India, this is still what is being practiced. We still invoke gods and we still offer sacrifices. and the sacrifices can be bloody or it can be of vegetables, fruits, etc. So we still continue to follow that age-old priest-physician's form of therapy. They had the practice of applying ointments to relieve pain. And they also did what is called fumigation. That means they would burn something and the smoke which emerged from that fire, which was supposed to be a holy fire, was expected to relieve pain. And they also used amulets, which again is something which we see even today. And ever so often you find a patient coming to your outpatient clinics with an amulet around the neck as an attempt at relieving him of his illness. And then there is this enigmatic plant, the soma, of which the juice was supposed to be very effective in relieving pain. And the soma juice was also used at times to induce anesthesia. And again, there's a very interesting little note which says that the efficacy of the soma was improved or increased if the priest physician or a holy bull was asked to consume the plant, the soma plant, and the urine which was passed by the priest physician or by the holy bull was utilized in the therapy of the patient, making us wonder whether there was some kind of an active ingredient which was excreted in the urine. Unfortunately, we don't know what this soma plant was. We really don't know. There have been lots and lots of papers written on the possible hypothetical soma plant, but we don't know for sure. That's the answer. The Veds were followed by commentaries on the Veds, which were called the Upanishads, and I'm sure you know much more about this than I do. And the one which we are interested in is this Brihad Aranyak Upanishad, because it has very interesting philosophical statements which have a bearing on pain and on its management. And the principle that has been enunciated in this particular Upanishad, it has influenced many of our most brilliant minds throughout history and even unto the recent times. The principle that was enunciated in this Upanishad. And of course, the same principle is enunciated in the Bhagavad Gita, and you find the same principle enunciated and elaborated upon in the Charak Samhita and in the Sushruta Samhita. Now, what was that principle? This is the principle that they enunciated. They said that true happiness or true bliss is only in Brahman, God, the infinite being. There is no bliss in anything which is finite. So there is no bliss in acquiring a Rolls Royce or a 10,000 foot flat or millions and millions and millions of rupees. There is no bliss in that, because these are all finite entities. Sooner or later they are going to disappear. And when they disappear, you will feel excruciating pain because you have lost all these amazing things. As all of us know, the philosophy is that the Atman, which the Westerners have translated into the word soul, S-O-U-L, soul, it is part of Brahman, it's part of this infinite being, and it has come into us, and when it leaves the human body, it should ideally go back and form part of Brahman. Unfortunately, if we do not behave properly during our lives, then we are subject to the cycle of rebirth. So this Atman, when my body passes away, when I die, this Atman will now be reborn. And if I've been particularly vicious and nasty, I may be reborn as a rat, for instance. But if I've been virtuous and if I've been nice and good, then I may be reborn as a saint. And for the person who's already a saint, when that person dies, this Atman leaves the body from the top of the head and then joins Brahman, and that is the end of the cycle of birth and death. So this is what all the Hindu philosophers of all time have aimed at. They are aiming at ending this cycle of birth and death and birth and death. And this is how they have put it, that the body is mortal, it will die, the soul is immortal, it can never die, so the body is actually of no consequence. It is the soul which is of consequence, and the body is alive only because the soul is there, and the body is discarded at death. If you realize this, they say, if you understand this, and if you make this part of your life, then there will be no pain. If you realize that the body is of no importance whatsoever, then there will be no pain. Now, you might feel that this is a bit too much, it's not practical, it's a little bit theoretical and philosophical, but probably has no applications. I hope to show you that it has applications and it works. So, if we want to reach this stage where the body becomes irrelevant and immaterial, then we have to discipline the mind. Because everything is perceived because of the mind. Because the mind sees, therefore we perceive. And if we want our mind and intellect and everything that is within us to understand that the body is of no importance, then we have to discipline the mind. And the question is, how do we discipline the mind? And so they prescribed, these ancient sages, thousands of years ago, they prescribed yoga. And they said, let this means by which the mind is to be disciplined be called yoga. And what is yoga? Not just the exercises of yoga, not this asana and that asana, but yoga as applicable to the disciplining of the mind. And the mind has to be disconnected from pain. This is the crucial criterion that they have laid down. So, shutting out all external objects, the sage controls the senses. This was Krishna's instruction to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, that you have to cut off all your external senses and control all your own internal desires and perceptions. And this is what we read in the Bhagavad Gita, the first paragraph, that a man of disciplined mind who moves about the objects of sense, the objects of sense being everything that we encounter in daily life, with the senses under control and free from attachment. He doesn't want anything. There is nothing which he desires. And free from aversion. He doesn't hate, he doesn't dislike. He is quite independent of all such feelings. He will attain purity of spirit. This is what Krishna is telling Arjuna. And in that purity of spirit is produced for him an end to all sorrow. This is his prescription, Krishna's prescription. You follow this prescription and you will never get pain or you will never get any sorrow. Not all of us can reach this great philosophical height. We may try, but some of us are more human than others, and so we may try but we may not fail. So what about those who cannot reach these heights, who cannot attain this kind of disciplining of the mind? So for them, it is suggested that when you get pain, you consider that pain as a penance which you are undertaking willingly. You consider that as an offering to God or an offering of some kind. And we see that being practiced today. We see people who poke metal objects through the cheeks and through the tongue. We see people who walk on fire. And we see many manifestations of what the Europeans call mortification of the human body. penance done in order to get pain, which is an offering that we are making to the powers that be. And here is one such example of penance which is being willingly carried out. That was the Hindu thinking and the Hindu philosophy and the Hindu principle. Turn now to Gautam Buddha. And what did Gautam Buddha think about pain? And what was his prescription of getting rid of all pain and sorrow? And this is what Gautam Buddha, in a talk which he delivered to his followers under the Bodhi tree, he told them this, that the noble truth of the cause of the pain is the craving, which tends to rebirth. Because of that craving, you will be reborn, because you did not achieve those heights. Combined with pleasure and lust, finding pleasure here and there, the craving for passion, the craving for existence, the craving for non-existence, all such cravings are conducive to your pain and your suffering. So we don't want that. We don't want that kind of pain. So what is the truth of how to get rid of this pain? And he used a very interesting phrase, the cessation without a remainder of craving and all those things. Cessation means stop. Without a remainder, stop completely. There is no trace of any of these kinds of feelings within your mind. If you can do that, you will be free from pain. And how does one achieve this? The Hindu philosophers said yoga. And this is what Buddha said, follow the eightfold way. There are a path which has got 8 steps, and follow all those steps. What are those 8 steps? You can read them right at the bottom. Right views, right intention, and so on and so forth. So he was also telling us the same thing, discipline your mind. And in a particular segment of that talk he says, if a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain will follow him as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. He was talking to individuals where he had to make it easy for them to understand and accept. So he used analogies which were common to that period of Indian history. And this was his final, the final lesson that he taught is there in the last paragraph. That when there was a rainy season and he became sick and he had sharp pains which remained right up to death, he, in the midst of pain, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of fever, suffering as witnessed by others, they thought that he was suffering, he remained mindful and self-possessed and bore them without complaint. So he showed by example that these should not really trouble us if we have disciplined our mind. That was Gautam Buddha. Now, as I told you, all this is nice to know, nice to read, nice to listen to, but is it practical? Can we really abolish pain by following this kind of high-minded philosophy? I'm going to give you 2 examples. And then I'm going to give you a third example, which is not a personal example by that individual, but it embodies his philosophy. So the first example is that of Ramakrishna Paramhans. As I think all of you know, Ramakrishna Paramhans developed cancer of the throat. And this was in April. And a few months in July, he could not swallow any solid food. It was extremely, to the observer, it was very painful for him to swallow. And he had, like Johnson had Boswell, who wrote all about Johnson's life and work. So Ramakrishna had Mahendranath Gupta, who wrote down everything that Ramakrishna said and has produced a memorable book of the life and work of Ramakrishna. And he has written this. The master's body was being racked with indescribable pain. This was the perception of observers around him, that he must be suffering horrendous pain. The disciples could not bear the sight of his illness, but somehow the master made him forget his suffering. And he sat there with a smile on his face and no trace of any discomfort from that malignant tumor in his throat. He was able to do that. It became difficult for him to talk, and he did manage to convey to Mahendranath that I noticed that when my mind is united with God, when I'm in that state, the suffering of the body disappears. I don't feel any suffering at all. I don't feel any abnormality. And so somebody asked him, look, you are a saintly person, you have lived a life which is, full of good things, good acts, good deeds, good thoughts, and how come you have been made to suffer? So he said, I am not suffering, it's the body which is suffering. He had, in his mind, disconnected himself from the body, which is what the ancients had advised. They had said, separate yourself from the body. The body is of no consequence. Separate yourself. Don't think that you are the body. Don't pander to the body. Don't cater to the body. And apparently that is what Ramakrishna also tried to tell his followers. And it is said that right up to the end of his life, his cheerfulness was astonishing. Now this is not written by Mahendranath Gupta. This is written by Christopher Isherwood, who was a Westerner who had come to India, and he wanted to study the works of Ramakrishna, and he stayed with Ramakrishna for a long period of time, and after this observation he has written this. And he says, Ramakrishna would go on telling himself, "O my mind, remain in bliss, remain happy, remain peaceful. Let the body and its pain look after each other. How are we concerned? If the body is suffering, let it suffer. That's to do with the body. Let's not bother about that." This is one example of an individual who embodied this philosophy, and with this philosophy, at least as far as everyone around him could make out, there was no pain. He did not suffer pain. We come to the second example, and this is from down south, Raman Maharshi. Raman Maharshi developed a swelling on the left humerus, and this is the only picture I can find showing the disease that Raman Maharshi had. I can't find a single picture showing the tumor or showing a swollen arm or showing anything. And this picture was made by Cartier-Bresson. Those of you who are interested in photography will be very familiar with the works of Henri Cartier-Bresson. Cartier-Bresson has published a book called The Decisive Moment, in which he says that for every photograph there is a decisive moment. Take the photograph at that moment and you got a photograph. You missed that moment and you lost that photograph. It's gone. And of course he's got a whole lot of photographs in that book which show the decisive moment and its impact on photography. Anyhow, this was Cartier-Bresson. So Cartier-Bresson took this picture, and when this tumor was detected, Raman Maharshi's disciples told him, look, this is something abnormal. We must go and show it to a doctor and we must see what is to be done about it. He said, why? Why should we show it to anybody? It's not causing me any problem. The swelling on the arm, let it be. It's not, it has to, the body will deal with it. We don't have to worry about it. But then the swelling became bigger, and then it started fungating and it started creating havoc. So then they consulted Professor Raghavachari, who was the professor of surgery at Stanley Medical College. And Professor Raghavachari said, this doesn't look nice, it looks nasty, and we need to at least take out a piece of it and see what this tumor is. As it turned out, it was an osteogenic sarcoma. So the Maharshi was unwilling. He said, why do you want to fiddle with it? Leave it, let it be. But he was persuaded by his disciples, and so he submitted to this. And Raghavachari said that, look, this is a painful procedure, doing the biopsy. So I would suggest that we do it under anesthesia. And he said, no anesthesia. There's no need for any anesthesia. You want to take a piece of tissue, you take it. What are you worried about? You go ahead and do it. And he underwent that biopsy without any anesthesia whatsoever. All this is recorded, incidentally. And finally, osteogenic sarcoma was determined, and the then treatment was amputation at the next joint. So he was told that we'll have to take your upper limb off at the shoulder, and he's saying, no, we're not going to do anything like that. The body itself is a disease, and this is a disease of the body. Just let it have its natural end. Let it take its course, and let whatever is going to happen, let it happen. No amputation. And so as you see, he was there with a bandaged arm, but the arm was still there. He didn't allow that amputation. And everyone, the doctors included, were aware that any other individual with this kind of a swelling would be in excruciating pain, because it was evident that the nerves were getting involved, blood vessels were getting involved by the tumor, and anyone with experience of an osteogenic sarcoma of the humerus knew that this must be very, very painful. But he didn't show any evidence of that pain, and very occasionally he would just say, there is pain, not I have pain. He differentiated, there is pain, but not I don't have any pain. Now, at one stage, because of the fungation, infection, and the problems which had occurred over there, it became necessary to do a dressing, and they had to probe that ulcer and the fistula or whatever it was that had formed over there. And he insisted that there will be no anesthesia. You want to do a dressing, you do a dressing, but there's no anesthesia. And others watching could sense that this kind of probing which had to be done must have been very, very, very painful. And one of his disciples, a person by the name of Duraswami, started weeping, and he walked out from there because he couldn't stand this sight anymore. And Maharshi looked after him as he was walking out, and he's saying, Duraswami is crying because he thinks that I'm suffering pain. When did he realize that I am not this body? The body is suffering pain. I am not this body. I have no pain. And as death approached, there was no change in his facial expression. He still remained calm. He still remained peaceful. And right up to the end, that was so. And as his disciples would discuss with him the possibility of death, this is what he told them, that the body is like a banana leaf on which all kinds of delicious things have been served. We have eaten those delicious things. We've enjoyed that. Now why are we going to preserve the banana leaf? The banana leaf has served its function. We have to discard it. And so that is what is our body. Our body has served its purpose. It's time to discard it. Let it go now. So that is the second example I have of individuals who were able to imbibe the ancient philosophy, and at least as far as everybody could make out, they were able to remain relatively pain-free as far as others could tell. They did not need morphine, pethidine, any of these fantastic drugs which we today use to abolish pain. These two individuals. Then we come to Swami Vivekananda, who was, of course, as you know, a disciple of Ramakrishna. And there was an American scholar who wanted to know what Vivekananda had written about pain, suffering, and its treatment. That scholar's name is J.R. Yale, which is right at the bottom. You see a reference over there. And this J.R. Yale was actually a priest, an American priest. And so he went through all the works of Vivekananda, the multiple volumes which had collected works of Vivekananda. He looked at the index. He could never find either the word or pain or the word suffering anywhere. Not in the index, nor could he find, and he couldn't go through every word in every volume, but as far as he could make out, these words just didn't exist. So then he thought to himself, and he says, let me try another tactic. And when he found what Vivekananda had written about suffering, he found that it was indexed under strength. And he says, Mr. Yale says, that when you think about it, it is right that pain and suffering should be indexed under strength. Really interesting perception of pain and suffering by this eminent follower of Ramakrishna. Some time ago, some neurophysiology studies were done. I'm sure there have been subsequent studies, but I haven't kept up with the field, so I can't give you recent references, but I'm only going to give you the references which I have. I'm sure there are other references which have been, other work which has been done. And in 1979, there was a group which studied people who walk on fire. Charcoal, which is glowing red hot, about 100 yards in length, and these people walk. They don't run, they walk on the charcoal. And when these people were examined and studied, they found that in the bloodstream there was a temporary surplus of endorphins. And that might explain why they did not feel the pain when they were walking on charcoal. How was that increase of endorphins produced? Before they walked on the charcoal, there was a whole series of prayers and chanting and religious music and a whole lot of stuff of that kind, after which these people walked. So maybe those rituals which had been performed had elevated endorphin levels and they were able to walk. This is the hypothesis put forth by these two authors. And in Tübingen, there was a physiologist called Larbig, Wolfgang Larbig. And Larbig and his colleagues studied a person whom they call a 48-year-old fakir. And this fakir was known to thrust metal spikes into his body and sit in a tub of benzene. Benzene is petroleum. So he would sit in a flaming tub of petroleum and didn't seem to be suffering any pain. He even underwent an appendix removal without any anesthesia. So they studied this fakir. And when they studied this fakir, they found that before any such episode, which was likely to produce pain, he would go into what they called a trance. And during this trance-like stage, the dopamine concentration in the blood went up. The EEGs showed changes which they have interpreted as showing dissociation between the thalamocortical and the lower arousal centers. And skin conductance was raised. And they postulate, and this postulate was repeated. I wrote a letter to Peter Nathan in London asking him what his views were on this subject, because Peter Nathan had worked on pain and was a very respected neurophysician. I also discussed this with our own homegrown neurosurgeon, Dr. Ramamurthy. Both of them told me the same thing, that it is possible that people like Ramakrishna and Raman Maharshi were able to use descending inhibitory pathways which were anatomically addressed and chemically addressed. That means they were able to activate chemical and anatomical pathways which halted all traffic of pain impulses going to consciousness. Somehow they were able to block pain impulses from reaching the conscious brain. This is what they postulated. And this is a photograph in Larbig's book. Larbig has written a book on this subject which is called Schmerz, S-C-H-M-E-R-Z. Schmerz is German for pain. So it's a complete book. I think Elsevier or somebody has published it. And in that is a chapter on this fakir and the experiments which Larbig and his group carried out on this fakir. So what is the question in front of us today? The question in front of us is that if we accept all these teachings, the teachings of the Vedas and the Upanishads and Charak and some Sushrut and Bhagavad Gita and the examples of Ramakrishna Maharshi and Ramakrishna and Raman Maharshi and Vivekananda's kind of philosophy that he had, can we use this to help patients who need palliative care? That is the big question. Can we reduce or eliminate the use of drugs such as morphine? Now, why should we reduce these drugs? Because these drugs, apart from relieving pain, also cloud consciousness. The patient becomes drowsy, becomes dopey, cannot communicate with his near and dear ones as he is dying. So is it possible for us to somehow use this information which we have in order to help our patients who have come for palliative care in advanced cancer? And of course, the even more important personal question is that when it is our turn to suffer severe pain which cannot be cured and from which the cause is probably going to cause our deaths, can we reach these sublime states? Thank you.